Now, not everyone has even had a COVID vaccine yet, but already there are questions about how long they will last and whether we'll all eventually need a third jab. So how do we figure that out? Well, the answer lies in antibodies.
Yes, it does, because antibodies, as you probably know by now, are generated either by being infected with the virus or by vaccination, or indeed by both. And they'll be stronger in some people than others. So to try to figure out how strong, so the government can identify any groups who may need a booster, they're beginning a nationwide antibody study across the UK. In a moment, we'll hear from a scientist who advises ministers about vaccines. But first, here's our science and innovation correspondent, Laura Goodwin.
There is a lot we still don't know about coronavirus and its effects on our bodies. And one of the key questions surrounds our level of protection after we've been infected. From tomorrow, anyone over the age of 18 who goes for a PCR test will have the option to take part in a new antibody study. Up to 8,000 people who subsequently test positive will be sent 2 antibody tests to take at home. These are pinprick blood tests, the first one done straight away, the second done 28 days later to measure the antibodies generated.
It helps us understand groups of the population who may be more vulnerable because their body doesn't have such a strong level of immunity from vaccination or by being infected with COVID. It helps us understand more about new variants and how well our body's responding and the effect against other variants of the virus. And lastly, it helps us to understand what population groups might benefit from any future booster programme.
We don't yet have exact details of what a booster programme here might look like, although it could start as early as next month. And it's likely the most vulnerable will be first to get a third jab. Meanwhile, the Valneva vaccine, being made in Livingston, which has been tested as a possible booster jab, today announced that they've begun a rolling submission for approval with the regulator, the MHRA.
In the UK, undoubtedly, we're going to be used as a booster vaccine. And I think the UK is continuing to build its options and its portfolio around the vaccines that will be able to use as a booster. I think there are still some countries outside the UK where we're potentially going to be a primary regimen for vaccination. So there are countries, for example, where there are people who are hesitant, not so much about vaccines, but maybe about new technology like mRNA. And of course, there are still a lot of countries in the world, as we know, where vaccination rollout is very poor and they need access to vaccines.
Other countries have already started booster programmes, among them Israel, which, despite leading the world in terms of vaccine rollout pace, has now seen a rise in breakthrough infections, bringing the prospect of another lockdown. They started giving third doses to the over 60s last month.
The cohort or the persons that got the vaccines very early, back in January and February, they had a higher risk of infection during July, when we saw an uptake of cases, mostly due to Delta, especially when compared with the same age cohort that were vaccinated later in March and April. And what this hinted was to waning of immunity. So that, in simple words, if you were vaccinated over 6 months ago, you had a higher risk of acquiring the infection when you were compared to persons who were vaccinated 3 months ago.
The final decision on a booster programme here remains with the JCVI, and it comes with a moral dilemma. Is it right that some countries start to give third doses, while others still wait for one? Laura Goodwin, BBC News.